23-year-old Jessica Reeves knew the rules. Never get involved with pilots. When they found her body stuffed in an aircraft compartment, they discovered she'd broken that rule twice. The question wasn't who she was sleeping with, but who couldn't bear to share her. Jessica Reeves silenced her alarm at 4:15 a.m., an hour before most of her neighbors in northeast Philadelphia even stirred. The 23-year-old flight attendant's one-bedroom apartment was modest but meticulously organized, much like her approach to life. Her Imperial Airways uniform hung pressed and perfect on the bathroom door, navy blue fabric crisp against the peeling white paint. As she moved through her morning routine, Jessica paused briefly at the framed photo on her dresser, her graduation from flight attendant training 6 months ago. She stood beaming in her freshly issued uniform, the Imperial Airways wings pin gleaming on her lapel. It had taken 3 application cycles and countless interview preparations to land the position. Unlike many of her classmates who viewed the job as a temporary adventure, Jessica saw it as the first step in a carefully plotted career path. She applied her makeup with precision, the company-approved shade of red lipstick, mascara that enhanced but didn't overwhelm, foundation that hid the dark circles from irregular sleep patterns crossing multiple time zones. Her blonde hair was twisted into a regulation bun, not a strand out of place. Jessica had learned quickly that in the airline industry, appearance wasn't merely encouraged but scrutinized. The pre-dawn drive to Philadelphia International Airport was quiet. Jessica rehearsed emergency procedures in her head while navigating the empty streets, a habit that had earned her top marks during training. By 5:30 a.m., she passed through employee security and headed toward the crew briefing room for her London flight. The hierarchical nature of airline crews became immediately apparent as she entered. The flight attendants clustered together, the more senior ones exchanging stories while newer hires like Jessica listened attentively. Pilots entered separately, their 4-striped epaulets and commanding presence automatically parting the crowd. Captain Victor Harmon entered last, his silver hair and weathered face testifying to his 30 years of experience. At 52, he carried himself with the assured confidence of a man who had navigated both aircraft and industry turbulence with equal skill. Jessica noticed how he unconsciously adjusted his wedding ring, a nervous tick that seemed at odds with his otherwise commanding demeanor. When he pulled out his wallet to check a note, Jessica glimpsed photos of a woman and 2 teenage children tucked behind his ID. Standing slightly behind Captain Harmon was First Officer Ryan Mackenzie. At 31, Ryan represented the new generation of pilots, confident, tech-savvy, and undeniably charming. His dark hair and easy smile had already made him the subject of crew room gossip. Jessica had heard he'd recently transferred from domestic routes to international, a coveted move for any pilot. Once aboard the Boeing 777, Jessica threw herself into the preparation procedures. She checked emergency equipment with methodical care, stocked galleys with mathematical precision, and reviewed passenger manifests for any special requirements. Lead flight attendant Diane Hudson noticed Jessica's thoroughness with approving eyes, mentioning that Captain Harmon appreciated preparation and had influence with scheduling. Throughout the trans-imperial flight, Jessica maintained perfect professionalism, but she couldn't help noticing First Officer Mackenzie's attention. He requested coffee from her station even though other attendants were closer. During meal service, he appeared in the galley to stretch his legs precisely when she was preparing trays. These interactions were brief but charged with subtle interest. From his jump seat at the front, Captain Harmon observed one such exchange, his expression unreadable behind his practiced professional mask. His eyes followed Jessica's movement down the aisle after Ryan returned to the cockpit. After landing at Heathrow, the exhausted crew headed to their layover hotel. The captain disappeared to his room with a brief nod, while the remaining crew gathered in the hotel bar. Jessica sipped her club soda, listening more than talking, storing away information about company politics and crew dynamics like valuable currency. As the gathering thinned out, Ryan moved to the empty stool beside her. Jessica declined alcohol, citing company policy about remaining technically on duty during layovers. Ryan expressed appreciation for her professionalism, noting that those who bend small rules often bend larger ones too. When the last of their colleagues departed with knowing smiles and subtle winks, Ryan invited Jessica to dinner at a local restaurant, claiming it was better than hotel food. Jessica hesitated, weighing professional boundaries against the undeniable pull of his invitation, but ultimately accepted with the stipulation that it was just dinner. Their meal extended into a 3-hour conversation, with Ryan sharing insights about career advancement and Jessica carefully revealing her ambitions beyond serving drinks at 37,000 feet. His advice seemed genuine, his interest flattering. It was past midnight when Jessica slipped her keycard into her hotel room door. She kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the bed, the exhaustion of a 10-hour flight finally catching up with her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan thanking her for a wonderful evening and expressing hope for many more flights together. Jessica stared at the message, a smile forming despite her attempt at professional detachment. What began as a standard trans-imperial flight had somehow shifted the trajectory of her carefully planned career path. She couldn't decide if that was thrilling or terrifying. Over the next 3 months, Jessica found herself increasingly requesting routes to London, Paris, and Rome, anywhere Ryan Mackenzie was scheduled to fly. Their relationship developed through a careful choreography of deliberate accidental meetings in hotel lobbies and innocuous dinners that extended into the early morning hours. At the Marriott in Paris, they rode separate elevators to her room. In Rome's Hotel Artemide, they entered the building 30 minutes apart. At Singapore's Marina Bay, they maintained professional distance in public spaces while passing room keys beneath restaurant tables. Each time, Jessica told herself this would be the last time. The Imperial Airways Employee Handbook devoted 3 pages to its non-fraternization policy, with special emphasis on relationships between flight crew. Termination was not merely possible but probable. Yet with each trans-imperial crossing, the professional boundaries she had once valued so highly blurred further. The Le Méridien in Tokyo marked their 3rd month of clandestine meetings. Jessica had begun collecting hotel notepads, small mementos of their encounters that she kept in a box beneath her bed in Philadelphia. Ryan had developed a habit of leaving her notes with inside jokes or observations about passengers, folded into impossibly small origami shapes and slipped into her hand during beverage service. Captain Victor Harmon noticed. The veteran pilot observed the subtle changes in Jessica's demeanor, the private smiles, the extra attention to her appearance, the lingering eye contact with his first officer during pre-flight briefings. Victor had navigated 30 years of airline politics by noticing details others missed. The way Jessica's eyes followed Ryan when he entered a room told a story familiar to Victor. During the Tokyo layover, Victor requested Jessica bring flight documents to his room. A simple professional request that she couldn't refuse. When she arrived, Victor's room showed signs of disarray unusual for the meticulous captain. Room service trays with barely touched food, medication bottles on the nightstand, multiple missed calls from home on his phone screen. Victor showed her photos of his wife Catherine, recently diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He described the progression of symptoms, the mounting medical bills, his struggles balancing career and caregiver responsibilities. The strain of maintaining his commanding presence despite spending nights researching experimental treatments had carved new lines around his eyes. Jessica listened with genuine sympathy, recognizing the fear beneath his controlled exterior. She shared stories of her own aunt's battle with chronic illness, offering small comfort through understanding. Victor's hand brushed hers as he reached for tissues, his touch lingering longer than necessary. When he leaned in, Jessica instinctively pulled back. Victor immediately apologized, but his words carried an undercurrent of implication. He mentioned upcoming route assignments, casually noting he'd recommended her for the coveted Hong Kong route, a coveted position for junior attendants. His influence with scheduling was considerable. He would understand, of course, if she felt uncomfortable working with him now. The pressure never manifested as direct coercion. Instead, it appeared as schedule adjustments, unexpected upgrades to premium routes, and subtle reminders of her precarious position as a probationary employee. 2 weeks after Tokyo, Jessica found herself in Victor's hotel room in Bangkok, her career ambitions wrestling with her growing sense of entrapment. A pattern emerged over subsequent flights. Victor requested Jessica on his crews with increasing frequency. She began receiving preferential assignments to long-haul international routes that normally went to senior attendants, generating whispers among crew members about her rapid advancement. Meanwhile, Ryan grew suspicious about Jessica's constantly changing schedule. The flight assignments that once aligned now frequently diverged, with Jessica unexpectedly reassigned to Victor's flights. During a rare shared layover in Madrid, Ryan questioned Jessica about her sudden favor with the captain. Her evasive answers created the first fracture in their relationship. Back in Philadelphia, Jessica lost 7 pounds in 3 weeks. Her uniform hung looser, and dark circles beneath her eyes resisted concealment. Fellow flight attendant Megan Campbell noticed the changes during their shared commuter rides to the airport. Megan had 5 years with Imperial Airways and recognized the symptoms of workplace stress. In the employee parking lot one morning, Jessica finally confided partially in Megan, describing a complicated situation with a superior without naming names. Megan's eyes widened with understanding and concern. She'd witnessed similar situations before and knew their typical outcomes. The junior employee usually sacrificed their career while the superior remained unscathed. Jessica began subtle maneuvers to distance herself from Victor. She requested domestic routes, cited family emergencies to avoid specific international assignments, and ensured she was never alone in his presence. Victor responded with the quiet precision of someone accustomed to controlling his environment. Her requested schedule changes were denied. Her domestic assignments mysteriously reverted to international routes, his international routes. On a rainy Tuesday in Philadelphia, Jessica sat in her apartment surrounded by hotel notepads from cities across the globe. Her phone displayed a text from Ryan asking why she'd cancelled their plans again. Her refrigerator held expired yogurt and wilting vegetables, evidence of her increasingly irregular home schedule. Her phone chimed with a new message. Victor's name appeared on the screen with words that sent ice through her veins. "We need to talk about your relationship with First Officer Mackenzie." Jessica stared at the message, her finger hovering over the power button, contemplating the momentary relief of shutting everything away. But the message remained, illuminating her face in the darkening apartment. The freedom she had sought in the skies had become a cage constructed of her own compromises. The notification light continued blinking, a small red warning beacon signaling danger ahead. The Atlantis Hotel in Dubai gleamed like a mirage against the desert backdrop. Jessica sat at a corner table in the restaurant, watching Victor approach through the maze of white-clothed tables. His captain's uniform was absent, replaced by an expensive grey suit that seemed designed to remind her he existed beyond the confines of aircraft. Victor ordered for both of them without consultation, a small assertion of control that did not go unnoticed. When the waiter departed, Victor placed his phone on the table, screen up. A photo illuminated the display, Jessica and Ryan entering her hotel room in Singapore, his hand resting intimately against her lower back. The revelation wasn't delivered with anger but with calculated precision. Victor's voice remained steady as he detailed their meetings across 3 continents, the times they'd shared rooms, even the specific hotels. His intelligence gathering rivaled that of security services. He reminded Jessica of Imperial Airways' fraternization policy on page 37 of the employee handbook, reciting the relevant section as if reading her professional eulogy. Protection came wrapped in threat. Victor could safeguard her career from this indiscretion. After all, he supervised crew evaluations and maintained close relationships with executives in operations. He might even support her application to the purser training program she'd mentioned wanting. Or alternatively, her promising aviation career could end with a single report. The choice was presented as a simple one: exclusive attention to Victor or professional extinction. The unspoken requirement hung between them like cabin pressure, invisible but absolutely controlling. Jessica returned to her room with Victor's deadline echoing in her mind. 24 hours to decide. She inserted her keycard with trembling hands, pushing the door open to find Ryan waiting inside. His face hardened as he tracked sand from Victor's shoes on the carpet. The confrontation erupted with Ryan demanding explanations. Private meals with the captain weren't standard protocol for junior flight attendants. The scheduling coincidences that repeatedly placed her on Victor's flights. The career opportunities mysteriously opening for her while more senior attendants remained grounded. The dam broke. Jessica revealed everything: Victor's initial approach in Tokyo, the implied threats to her career, the growing entanglement she couldn't escape. Ryan's expression transformed from accusation to horror as he recognized the textbook abuse of power. Ryan's solution came with immediate certainty: report Victor to Human Resources. His conviction carried the confidence of someone whose word had never been questioned. But Jessica understood the reality awaiting a 23-year-old probationary flight attendant accusing a decorated captain. Her evidence consisted only of private conversations against Victor's spotless 30-year record. The airline industry's history of handling such accusations did not favor women at her level. The next Imperial crossing created a pressurized container of tension. Jessica served first class with mechanical precision while tracking both men's movements. Ryan remained in the cockpit except when required to rest, his jaw tight whenever Victor was present. Victor maintained his commanding presence, his eyes following Jessica with the intensity of someone monitoring a depreciating investment. Halfway across the Imperial, during the quiet period when most passengers slept, Victor cornered Jessica in the rear galley. The narrow space between serving carts left no room for escape as he delivered his final ultimatum. Her deadline had passed without the answer he required. Her next schedule would place her on regional routes unless she demonstrated proper appreciation for his mentorship. The relationship with Ryan must end before they reached New York. What Victor didn't notice was Jessica's phone concealed behind the coffee pot, its recording application capturing every word of his thinly veiled threats. The 7-minute recording became her first concrete evidence. In Boston during their layover, Jessica played the recording for Ryan in her hotel room. His reaction revealed a new facet of his personality, a volcanic anger that transformed his usually handsome features. He paced the small room, veins prominent on his forehead, fists clenching and unclenching as he catalogued increasingly violent consequences for Victor's behavior. Jessica found herself calming Ryan rather than receiving support, noting with growing unease how quickly his protective instincts transformed into possessive rage. When he punched the wall beside the television, leaving a visible dent in the drywall, Jessica recognized a dangerous pattern she'd witnessed in her parents' volatile relationship. Back in Philadelphia between trips, Jessica researched Imperial Airways reporting procedures at her kitchen table. Her laptop displayed the company's sexual harassment protocols, witness requirements, and investigation timelines. She drafted an email to Human Resources, detailing Victor's behavior with clinical precision. Her cursor hovered over the send button for 17 minutes before she saved it to drafts instead. The decision to involve Chief Purser Elizabeth Reynolds came after careful consideration. With 25 years at Imperial Airways, Elizabeth had navigated the male-dominated industry with legendary effectiveness. Jessica scheduled a private meeting 2 days before her next international rotation. The night before this meeting, Jessica's phone chimed with an incoming email from an anonymous address. The subject line alone stopped her breathing. "Think carefully before your meeting with Reynolds." The email contained details only someone intimately familiar with her schedule would know. It referenced her Singapore hotel room number, the specific restaurants where she'd met Ryan, even the draft email to HR sitting unsent on her laptop. The final line delivered the threat with chilling clarity. Consequences extended beyond careers to personal safety. Jessica's hands shook as she called Megan, words tumbling out between panicked breaths. Megan's immediate offer of her spare bedroom provided temporary sanctuary. Jessica moved through her apartment checking window locks and door hinges, survival instincts activating beneath her professional veneer. As darkness settled over Philadelphia, Jessica packed an overnight bag with mechanical efficiency, her flight attendant training surfacing in crisis. Essentials only, nothing that couldn't be replaced, identification secured. The sound of a car door closing in the parking lot sent her dropping to the floor below window level, heart hammering against her ribs. The ride to Megan's apartment passed in tense silence, Jessica checking the rearview mirror at every intersection. The anonymous email had transformed abstract workplace tension into immediate physical threat. For the first time, Jessica realized her situation had escalated beyond career consequences to something potentially deadly. The recording that was meant to protect her now felt like a dangerous liability, evidence that someone wanted destroyed, along with anyone possessing it. Jessica arrived at Philadelphia International Airport with eyes burning from minimal sleep. Her overnight bag remained at Megan's apartment, a precaution that now seemed prescient as she reviewed the crew manifest. Both Victor and Ryan were assigned to the London flight, a scheduling anomaly that violated standard crew pairing protocols. Victor's influence with scheduling had created this perfect storm. At the scheduling desk, Jessica requested a last-minute reassignment, citing personal emergency. The coordinator checked her computer before delivering the unwelcome news. The flight was already understaffed, and her request was denied. Jessica's name remained on the manifest for Flight 847 to London Heathrow, locked into a metal tube with two men whose behavior had become increasingly unpredictable. Pre-flight procedures unfolded with mechanical precision despite the underlying tension. Jessica checked emergency equipment without making eye contact with either pilot during the walk-around inspection. Victor conducted the crew briefing with unusual serenity, his voice steady and his demeanor relaxed. By contrast, Ryan appeared disheveled, his uniform immaculate but his eyes bloodshot and his fingers drumming constantly against his thigh. In the forward galley, Jessica activated her phone one final time before international mode restrictions. She sent Megan a detailed text with names, dates, and the existence of the recorded conversation with Victor. The message ended with, "If anything unusual happens, share this with Elizabeth Reynolds and my parents." Her finger hovered over the send button before adding, "I'm afraid." The Boeing 777 lifted into the night sky with 211 passengers, most already donning eye masks and adjusting blankets for the overnight Imperial crossing. Jessica focused exclusively on her service duties, volunteering for the furthest sections from the cockpit to minimize interactions with both men. When Victor emerged from the flight deck, she made certain to remain surrounded by colleagues or passengers. During first-class meal service, Jessica maintained flawless professionalism. Her hands didn't tremble as she poured wine for executives in 2A and 2B. Her voice remained steady while recommending menu options. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed the hypervigilance beneath her performance. 3 hours into the flight, Victor's voice came through her crew interphone. The captain requested her presence in the cockpit during First Officer Mackenzie's scheduled break. Jessica glanced down the darkened cabin, most passengers now asleep under blue ambient lighting. No witnesses, no protection. She straightened her uniform and complied. Victor sat alone in the cockpit, the imperial darkness creating an intimate atmosphere despite the technical environment. He expressed disappointment about her meeting with Elizabeth Reynolds scheduled for their return. Such matters could be resolved privately, he suggested, without damaging multiple careers. His tone carried artificial reasonableness, a negotiator recognizing his position was compromised. Jessica revealed her documentation of his behavior, the recording, the text messages, the witnesses to his scheduling manipulations. Her evidence might not be conclusive, but it established a pattern that would trigger a formal investigation. Victor's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the control yoke. Later, while restocking the rear galley, Jessica encountered Ryan emerging from his rest period. His appearance had deteriorated further, tie loosened, eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit cabin. He suggested a radical solution. Both resign immediately upon landing, leave the industry entirely, start over somewhere Victor couldn't reach them. When Jessica refused, emphasizing her scheduled meeting with Reynolds, Ryan's face contorted with something between fear and rage. He was coming apart while they were still 37,000 feet above the ocean. The aircraft encountered unexpected turbulence over the mid-Imperial. Moderate jolts sent prayer beads rolling down the aisle and woke several passengers. Jessica secured the cabin efficiently, her mind calculating how to minimize time alone in vulnerable areas. In the forward lavatory, she swallowed an anti-anxiety medication dry, the bitter taste lingering as she examined her exhausted reflection. During the quietest period of the flight, with most passengers deeply asleep and the cabin darkened to navy blue emergency lighting, Jessica conducted the required inventory check in the rear galley. The beverage cart counts didn't match consumption records, a minor discrepancy that required documentation. She knelt beside the cart, counting miniature wine bottles and noting figures on her inventory sheet. The rear galley stood isolated from the main cabin, separated by a heavy curtain that now hung perfectly still in the climate-controlled environment. Service areas during night flights existed in a liminal space, neither public nor private, occupied by crew members moving like ghosts through manufactured twilight. Jessica became aware of the absolute silence surrounding her, broken only by the constant engine hum that vibrated through the aircraft structure. A slight movement of air against her neck provided the only warning. Jessica turned to find Victor standing in the galley entrance, his uniform jacket removed, his expression unreadable in the dim light. His voice remained conversational as he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The recording she'd made had been a critical mistake, he explained. The meeting with Reynolds an unacceptable risk. The struggle remained contained within the galley's narrow confines. Jessica's flight attendant training included basic self-defense, but Victor's strength and determination overwhelmed her initial resistance. Her nails scraped against the galley wall as his hands closed around her throat. The inventory clipboard clattered against the floor, the sound absorbed by the engine noise. Victor's methodical nature extended to the aftermath. He straightened his uniform while surveying the galley for evidence, collecting Jessica's fallen items with gloved hands. Her body was carefully arranged inside the rarely accessed equipment compartment beneath the rear galley floor, a space checked only during major servicing, not routine turnarounds. The flight continued toward London Heathrow without interruption. When lead flight attendant Diana questioned Jessica's absence, Victor mentioned seeing her looking unwell. Probably resting in the crew break area, he suggested. Long-haul flights frequently saw attendants taking unauthorized breaks during quiet periods. The Boeing 777 touched down at Heathrow under cloudy London skies, 17 minutes ahead of schedule. Victor taxied to the gate with characteristic precision. Passengers disembarked with sleepy gratitude, collecting scattered belongings and filing past the crew without noticing one missing member. As the cabin emptied, cleaning crews boarded with vacuums and trash bags. 2 flight attendants conducted final cabin checks while others prepared for customs processing. Maintenance personnel arrived for routine systems checks before the return flight. In the rear galley, a cleaning supervisor noticed dried liquid beneath the beverage cart. She knelt down, pushing the cart aside to access the spill. Her hand paused as she noticed the equipment compartment access panel slightly ajar, its locking mechanism not fully engaged. Following protocol, she called over a maintenance technician to investigate the irregularity. The technician reached for the recessed handle, preparing to inspect what should have been a secure storage area containing only emergency equipment and tools. The maintenance technician's scream echoed through the empty aircraft cabin. What should have contained safety equipment instead held Jessica Reeves' body, carefully arranged to simulate an accidental fall. Her Imperial Airways uniform remained perfectly buttoned despite the violence that had ended her life. Only her eyes, fixed and dilated, testified to her final moments of terror. Heathrow Airport police responded within minutes, quickly recognizing the situation exceeded routine jurisdiction. London Metropolitan Police's Major Crimes Unit arrived as bewildered passengers for the return flight to Philadelphia gathered at the gate, watching their aircraft transform into a sealed crime scene. Flight 847's scheduled departure was cancelled, stranding travelers and triggering a cascade of operational disruptions across 3 terminals. Detective Inspector Harriet Wells supervised the initial scene examination, noting the meticulous positioning of Jessica's body. The careful arrangement suggested an attempt to stage an accident, perhaps an equipment compartment check gone wrong, but bruising patterns around the neck told a different story. Jessica had fought her attacker, evidenced by defensive wounds on her hands and forearms. Whoever killed her had taken time to clean and organize the scene, an opportunity only possible during the quiet night flight. Both pilots had already departed for the Imperial Airways crew hotel before the body's discovery. Standard procedure allowed flight crew to leave immediately after completing logbooks while cabin crew remained for turnover. This 15-minute head start gave Victor Harmon sufficient time to reach the safety of the hotel before the first police sirens approached the terminal. Within 6 hours, the investigation expanded across international boundaries. FBI Special Agents Marcus Chen and Rebecca Torres landed at Heathrow the following morning, reflecting the case's jurisdictional complexity. A crime committed in American-registered aircraft in international airspace involving American citizens created an investigative puzzle requiring unprecedented cooperation between agencies. Forensic teams dismantled the galley area piece by piece. Luminol revealed blood traces despite careful cleaning, droplets on the beverage cart handle, a partial handprint on the compartment edge, and microscopic spatter on the adjacent wall panel. The aircraft's limited security cameras, designed primarily for cockpit monitoring, provided fragmented evidence. Jessica entering the rear galley at 2:13 aircraft time, Victor leaving the cockpit at 2:17, and a critical 18-minute gap before Victor reappeared on the forward cabin camera at 2:35. At the crew hotel, investigators established interview rooms for all Flight 847 personnel. Victor Harmon appeared impeccably composed in fresh uniform, his logbooks and timeline prepared with professional precision. He acknowledged seeing Jessica appearing unwell mid-flight but insisted he'd assumed she was resting during her break period. His account remained unwavering through 3 separate interviews, each detail consistent with previous statements. Ryan Mackenzie presented a stark contrast during his interview, disheveled, emotional, and inconsistent about when he'd last seen Jessica. His claim of sleeping during his designated rest period conflicted with galley attendant statements placing him near the lavatories at approximately 2:20. Ryan's obvious distress initially focused suspicion in his direction, particularly after investigators discovered his argument with Jessica in the rear galley witnessed by another crew member. The investigation's direction shifted dramatically when Megan Campbell contacted Philadelphia police. Jessica's final text message had reached her moments before International Towers transferred the flight to oceanic control. The detailed message named Victor explicitly, referenced recorded evidence of harassment, and expressed fear about being on the flight. Megan's statement revealed Jessica's planned meeting with Chief Purser Reynolds and the pattern of unwanted attention from Victor. Flight data recorders provided crucial technical evidence. Every cockpit door opening was logged by aircraft systems, creating an irrefutable timeline. An unauthorized opening occurred at 2:16, when Victor should have remained on the flight deck during Ryan's rest period. This single data point contradicted Victor's carefully constructed narrative and corresponded exactly with Jessica's final appearance on security footage. Imperial Airways reluctantly provided human resources records after federal subpoenas. The documents revealed a pattern previously invisible to investigators. 5 female flight attendants who had worked regularly with Victor had requested transfers within 6 months. 2 had resigned entirely from aviation. None had filed formal complaints, but exit interviews contained veiled references to professional conflicts and uncomfortable working environment. Ryan's background investigation uncovered a restraining order filed by a former girlfriend 3 years earlier, though charges had been dropped. This discovery initially reinforced suspicion against him until digital forensics recovered Jessica's cloud storage account. The recorded conversation with Victor, automatically backed up to her cloud account, captured his explicit threats connecting sexual compliance with career advancement. The aircraft's limited security cameras initially seemed insufficient until forensic analysts compiled a comprehensive movement map of all crew members. The resulting timeline showed only Victor had both opportunity and proximity during the critical window of Jessica's death. Microscopic evidence sealed his fate. Skin cells found beneath Jessica's fingernails matched Victor's DNA profile with 99.97% certainty. London authorities arrested Victor Harmon at Heathrow Airport as he attempted to board a flight to Dubai 3 days after the murder. His extradition to the United States followed 2 weeks of legal proceedings, with prosecutors citing the overwhelming forensic evidence and flight recorder data contradicting his statements. Media coverage extended beyond the murder to examine airline industry culture. Jessica's case exposed the vulnerability of junior crew members in the isolated hierarchy of international aviation. Television specials featured interviews with former flight attendants describing similar experiences of harassment without adequate reporting mechanisms or protection. Imperial Airways implemented comprehensive policy changes in the wake of the scandal. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory prevention training, and restructured scheduling procedures to prevent power imbalances emerged from the corporate damage control. The airline established third-party oversight for harassment investigations, tacitly acknowledging the systemic failures that had enabled Victor's behavior. Jessica's parents, Michael and Diane Reeves, established a scholarship fund for aspiring flight attendants in their daughter's name. The Jessica Reeves Safety Advocacy Scholarship specifically supported training in recognizing and responding to workplace harassment and abuse. Their quiet dignity during court proceedings transformed their personal tragedy into industry-wide reform. The grand jury indictment charged Victor Harmon with first-degree murder and multiple counts of sexual harassment. His wife filed for divorce before the preliminary hearing concluded. Former Imperial Airways executives faced separate charges for negligence in handling previous informal complaints against Victor. Ryan McKenzie resigned from Imperial Airways and commercial aviation entirely. FBI interviews revealed him as deeply troubled but ultimately innocent of murder, a man whose anger issues had made him the perfect alternative suspect in Victor's calculated plan. The case transformed aviation industry standards across multiple carriers. Jessica's protocols became shorthand for harassment prevention policies emphasizing accountability for senior crew members. Yet despite institutional changes, the core vulnerability remained. Young women navigating power imbalances in pressurized metal tubes far from help, the same dynamics that had cost Jessica Reeves her future.